Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the US Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of Sunday, September 15th, 2024. Today we have a fascinating conversation in store for you on the subject of amateur radio, also known as ham radio. And this is a bit of a different discussion than we would typically have in transhumanist circles, but it is a fascinating area of technology as well as a fascinating community, and the pursuit of amateur radio does have some relevance to transhumanism as well as safeguarding our civilization in the event of emergencies and facilitating citizen science endeavors. So joining us today is our distinguished U.S. Transhumanist Party panel, including our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our member from Texas, and an individual who has been our previous guest. He also runs the Transhumanist Party of Texas, Alan Crowley. And our special guests today are Daniel Tweed, who is our Director of Community and Citizen Science, as well as our 2024 U.S. Vice Presidential candidate. He is quite an amateur radio enthusiast. He has mentioned this subject before on our salons, and I thought it would be a great idea to ask him to really delve into it in depth. And he has also brought along his fellow amateur radio practitioner, Kent Hastings, and we will learn more about Kent and his background and experiences in amateur radio during our discussion today. But for now, I would like to give Dan the opportunity to give a brief introduction to amateur radio, what it is, some of its history, some of the developments that are ongoing in this field, and then I think we will have quite an enlightening conversation on the topic. So, Daniel, you have the floor.
Well, and thank you, everyone. And I think amateur radio, or radio sport, as it's sometimes referred to in other countries, is often called the world's best hobby, as well as the world's first social media. It actually goes back to the early 1900s, a little bit before, when people were playing with spark gap transmitters, which you can't use now because they put out so much interference when you do Morse code with a spark gap. It's basically, if you ever listen to an AM radio and you hear a burst of static during a thunderstorm, that's kind of called RFI, radio frequency interference. It's not something that you want to do on the ham bands these days, but it is a hobby. I call it really a critical infrastructure of civilization. It's enjoyed by 2 to 3 million people, depending on how you count it, in the different international telecommunications union regions around the world. I think there's 5 of them, isn't that right, Kent? I think that's how they generally count. How many,
I don't know offhand.
Yeah, active people in each region. It's interesting to me that the country with the highest percentage is also the country with the longest lived citizens. That's Japan. So, is there a correlation there for transhumanists? News at 11. Stay tuned and find out. But it was almost not kept in the public purview. During World War I, it kind of went dark. Obviously, it was considered like a big, scary, crucial military secret technology, and it was on the verge of being taken over by the Navy. Makes sense because Navy ships need to send out distress calls, and they want to be self-sufficient. And one thing about the amateur radio hobby is it makes you more aware of self-sufficiency. You want to make sure you've got off-grid power and batteries and antennas you can set up and take down. And actually, before I get too far afield, there is a rather critical legislative alert that I'd like to emphasize, and that is the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act, which is currently kind of stalled in both the House and the Senate. It's in need of co-sponsors, both in the House and Senate. I can, if you get your pens and pencils out, I'll give you the bill numbers. The House bill is called H.R. 4006, and the Senate bill is SB 3690. And it's kind of funny because Tesla was obsessed with 369. He said that was like very special mystical numbers. And Tesla also said if people really understood energy, frequency, and vibration, they would unlock the secrets of the universe. So, gosh, that sounds like he's describing ham radio there. And Tesla was. Some people think he was kind of cheated out of his credit for his radio inventions. And anyway, that's I think he did finally get some justice in court. But anyway, the hobby is if you haven't investigated the state of the available equipment and the drop in price and the new modes and privileges and things you can do on amateur radio, you'll probably be fairly surprised at how it's developed. I think. Oh, well, back to the bill. The Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act. It basically would allow people to be effective stations by having antennas that aren't, hugely oversized. I think the limit is about 1 meter diagonal measurement, which is basically what people are allowed to put up when they want to get Dish Network or one of the other television satellite services. So, for something that saves lives, you would think that homeowners associations shouldn't be able to put in restrictive covenants about antenna design and size and appearance. I think it's a reasonable bill, and this is also National Preparedness Month. September is, and here in Thousand Oaks, California, we got a little foretaste of preparedness. I was awakened with a pretty sharp jolt on Thursday morning. It was a 4.7 in Malibu, and we are overdue for the so-called big one on the San Andreas. So it's a good time to have all of the preparedness you can muster. In fact, we're sort of in the midst of a very big solar weather event as well. And the last time we had a really big event, it was enough to, it was called the Carrington event. And I believe, do you remember what year that was? The Carrington, I think it was 1859.
1853, I think, but I will double check.
It was right before the Civil War. But yeah, if that happened today, it would literally disable the electric grid practically indefinitely. And there have been some studies and experts and books written about the consequences of our energy grid going down. And it's not a very good event. There are estimates that like in 6 months, there might be 90% casualties from civil disorder and other things, because really our whole civilization is predicated upon cheap, convenient, accessible electricity and all that it provides. So humans are not typically preparedness oriented. I think they tend to follow the herd. That works 90% of the time, but 10% of the time it doesn't work. Look out. I think this also relates to a study that was done on how humans cooperate or not, and that's kind of an interesting number. This scientist Joachim Benkler, who was researching it, said 1/3 of the people will always cooperate, 1/3 will never cooperate, and the middle third will just follow whatever the majority does. So this could be useful for moving political opinion. Keep that in mind. I think There was Margaret Mead that said it's always a small majority that actually causes large changes in society. But another large change in society that I wanted to relate to amateur radio is what some would call the overview effect. It was really the most valuable thing that came back from the space program, was that picture of the whole Earth. The first one was the Earthrise that astronaut Bill Anders took as they came around the moon on their fourth orbit. Now, you wouldn't see this Earthrise if you were standing on the surface of the moon, but when you're orbiting the moon, you can see it because the moon is in sort of a gravity lock with Earth. It keeps the same side facing towards Earth. So that was a turning point in human consciousness, because it sort of jump-started the nascent environmental movement. It gave us the sensation that wow, maybe Henry George was right when he called the Earth a ship on which we sail through space. when Bucky Fuller picked that term up again about 100 years later in a book published the same year, Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. So another quote I like that Bucky Fuller said is, there are no passengers on Spaceship Earth. We are all crew. So this is how I am kind of circling back to amateur radio, because if there is a crew role or crew infrastructure, I really think that amateur radio has a good shot at being that Spaceship Earth crew. There's a event that happened, I think, in 1991 aboard a ship called the Oceanus, where the actual crew members, after the ship was starting to sink, they loaded their luggage into the lifeboat and they were gone, leaving 571 passengers, I think, on this sinking ship. And it turned out that the entertainers and musicians actually organized and saved everyone on the ship without benefit of the crew. So kind of a metaphor there for who steps up to their crew roles on a spaceship or a ship and who doesn't. So why would amateur radio be such a great crew kind of infrastructure? Well, it's a hobby. It's a self-selected hobby of people that are civil, polite, technically savvy. They're informed. They are future oriented. They think about preparedness. They're generally, a great community to get involved with. There's probably local ham clubs at any part of the world, unless you're in like Yemen or North Korea. Those are the two countries that explicitly ban amateur radio. But again, from a technical point, if you start broadcasting on, well, you're not broadcasting. That's the wrong word. This is point to point, peer to peer. It's a communications medium. It's not pirate radio. It's not playing music for the masses. But most militaries, if they wanted to find someone who pops up with a radio transmitter, that's possible for them to do. So you have to have a little bit of faith that you're not going to run afoul of some armed authority if you do use amateur radio. But I guess running for office, I'm a public person anyway. You become an amateur radio and you get your call sign, and the details are sort of public knowledge. So that maybe is a bit of a showstopper for some people if they really want to be under the radar, I suppose. But I would point out that if life is involved, life saving is involved, it doesn't matter if you have a license. You just get the communications out any way you can, and that's part of the operating philosophy. Is as much as being a amazing hobby, it's saved probably countless lives in terms of disasters and times when the grid was down, the phones were down, and people go, well, why do you need ham radio? You got a cell phone. The cell phone network is routinely overloaded during times of emergencies because everyone is trying to use their cell phone to call their friends and say, hey, are you okay? So just that factor knocks the traditional communication infrastructure offline. So I had a graphic that I'm developing this talk. What do these 5 people have in common? And it could be a quiz, or it's a little bit of a loaded question because only 2 of the people here were actually radio amateurs, and the second from the left is none other than Hugo Gernsback, who, before he started becoming a publishing science fiction, magnate and getting an award for science fiction named after him, he was heavily involved in importing electronics. He had a company called the Electro Imports, and he published the Radio Experimenter, tons of magazines about amateur radio hobby. He founded the American Wireless Association. He had a pretty long life. I think he died in 1967. Born, I should have that date in front of me, but born in the 1800s. And so he also had about 30 patents, and he originally called it scientific fiction. And people said, just make it science fiction. It's harder to say these other terms, but yeah, he was a man just introduced at an early age to inventiveness. I think his father demonstrated a battery and a light, and you show that stuff to a kid, oh my god, it really kickstarts their curiosity in their science career, as it did with the next person next to him, who is the father of the American Radio Relay League. That's the son of Hiram Stevens Maxim. That's Hiram Percy Maxim, founder of the ARRL. And he was also exposed to electrical inventions by his father, who was the inventor of the machine gun, no less. And his son went on, I think his son wrote a book called A Genius in the Family about his dad, and another book which I'm interested to find called Life's Place in the Cosmos. Yeah, that's Amateur Radio Relay League, and it's still called that to this day. Here's their operator's manual. They put it out every year. So it's kind of funny, the Relay League part of the name is there was a tube, a vacuum tube to build a radio that Hiram wanted, and in those early days it was not cheap to send a telegram. I think it was like $1 a word or something like that. So Hiram said, if I talk to all my buddies, and that in those days you could reach about 20 to 30 miles with your radio transmission, and he apparently knew enough people inside of these little 20, 30 mile hops that he got his order for the tube sent out to the East Coast that way. And so he saved the price of a telegram, and the amazing messaging potential of amateur radio was off and running. In fact, the internet has that same kind of protocol called store and forward, and to this day you can still send a radiogram, and the amateur radio network will use whatever store and forward methods they can to deliver your radiogram. And that's a public service. You're not going to get charged for that. Hams are very known for a great public service ethic. So quickly going on those other people on the list, we talked about the Earthrise photo, and fourth from the left is Bill Anders, who sadly recently died. He was 90 years old doing some acrobatic flying over the water, and did not execute his bottom of his loop successfully. Died doing what he loved. What can you say? That's and maybe that's not a bad way to go out, doing what you love. So he was happened to be on that window seat on Apollo 8 and snapped that famous overview effect Earthrise photo that I talked about. And then next to Anders is one of my heroes, Buckminster Fuller. Richard Buckminster Fuller, R. Buckminster Fuller, the planet's friendly genius, some called him. He was the guy that really was ready to actually throw himself into Lake Michigan when he was in his 20s or 30s. He'd been a business failure. He'd been kicked out of Harvard, and this voice in his head said, "Wait, your life doesn't belong to you. You don't have the right to destroy it. See what an average person could do if he devotes himself to what he called omni-advantaging, which was and design science, anticipatory design science." And so Bucky Fuller followed his own voice in his head advice and turned his saved life around and brought us things like the geodesic dome, Dymaxion car, Dymaxion house, dozens of other patents, and really he said it's technologically feasible for the world to take care of everyone, and I think that's still the case, and I think amateur radio people would follow that advice. Now we skipped the man on the far left, and that is the original person to talk about Spaceship Earth. A man named Henry George wrote a book called Progress and Poverty in 1879, and it's funny how people can sort of disappear down the memory hole. You probably were never taught about him. He's kind of the original progressive because he pioneered an idea that some would call land capitalism. And that is that economic rent could be used to fund all the infrastructure needed to govern society, get rid of all the other taxes on, things like income tax. Why do you want to tax a good thing like people being productive? But, go ahead and tax a bad thing like people monopolizing land unfairly. And he wasn't talking about, kicking anyone off land they already had. He just said, let's determine a market-based rent and pay that into the commons and get rid of all the other taxes that way. Kind of an oversimplification of a lot of his theories, but his book was only number 2 to the Bible as far as being widely read. Millions of people read his book. His funeral was the size of Abe Lincoln's funeral. He was lauded by all kinds of people. Not so much Karl Marx. Karl Marx said, "Well, this guy's just trying to pull some shenanigans to save capitalism." And yeah, you're darn right, Karl. This is like it would save the free market because we don't have a peaceful theory of land and common property like air and water. We've got to fix that, I think, because that's what most wars are fought over. Is like who's going to get control of what land, and how do you decide that? It usually involves a lot of bloodshed. So, his ideas are still out there. There's actually a friend of mine named Jeff Graubert who has a business plan called A Fierce. AF, I can put it in the chat, AFFEERCE.com. And it's basically doing what Henry George was talking about, only doing it as a business plan, which would just sort of grow with voluntary participation. And so, yeah, that's my windabout way of connecting Spaceship Earth and the crew of Spaceship Earth, which I think amateur radio people have a great shot at fulfilling that role. So I'd like to kind of open it up and chat with Kent. He's got a much more strong history in the hobby. I got licensed as a technician, which was the lowest class back in the 90s, but then I let that license expire. You think you have a 10-year term, you have to renew your license. So I retested, actually passed the extra class exam, and have my current call sign. Extra class gives you maximum privileges on all the spectra, and I think it's up to 1,000 watts, 1,500, I think. But I think the digital modes are probably having even more potential than the so-called phone or voice modes. And I know Kent had some proposals for what I guess now would be called like mesh texting systems that would be very hard for authorities to, suppress. And by the way, they're talking right now about banning TikTok. It's like not a very good optic. That the American experiment that's about free speech is now going to be selectively trying to censor the internet, perhaps. So, what a good time to get your own internet, to have your own off-grid, peer-to-peer, decentralized communication facilities. Um, what any comments on that, Kent? You've been kind of a long time anti-authoritarian like me.
Well, I love Big Brother now, though. So, no. Anyway, yeah, there's some new mesh network things that you're talking about. So I haven't followed them very closely. I'm doggedly biting into this in Morse concept, which is this to use Morse code for emergency communications, because half of the amateurs that are licensed have their technician class, and they'd be legally able to use Morse code on the shortwave bands that actually can travel some distance. So even at like a low, you can run up to 200 watts as a technician, and 5 or 10 watts gets you nationwide access, if not worldwide access, on bands that they have access to. But anyway, I'll let you finish your statement, and I'll jump in later.
Oh well, I'm just kind of opening it up, but yeah, what are the? I mean, now that you can link the internet with portals to like repeaters, mountaintop repeaters, the internet sort of effectively gives you the worldwide coverage that some of the shortwave bands used to be relied on to do. And yeah, any comment about the internet being the new DX or
Well,
distance hunting?
I used it Echolink, and we have things like the Wind system, and All Star Net, and some other things. D Star, like that's a different matter. But there are ways of using the internet. However, the internet is kind of like the old plain old telephone system, or fiber optics and stuff like that. They can be burned and cut or disrupted. And for instance, I got back in 1989. Was it 89 when the World Series quake happened in San Francisco? That I was walking through this. I was living there. I was walking through the streets. There's glass all over the street, and you may have seen those neighborhoods that were some of the houses collapsed, and I think part of the Bay Bridge collapsed. So that was kind of a wake-up call that, kind of nice to have my ham radio again. So I got back into the hobby. I got licensed in '78, and was kind of dabbling around as a hobby since after that. But so after that, I got really into the hobby again, and I had another wake-up call. I was living in let's see, yeah, I guess I was living in Chico. I was taking care of my mom because she passed in 2021. But back in 2018, I was there, and the campfire in Paradise was raging. And I went to high school at Paradise High School for a semester. And but Paradise was didn't quite burn up to the ground entirely, but it was severely damaged. Some people died, and it kind of what that prompted was my involvement, and also the organization of CERT and Aries becoming active in Northern California, especially up in that where the rich communities are. Right now, they're having a big fire, the park fire or something like that. Or it just may have concluded, hopefully, but they're so the fires continue throughout the state and in other states, Colorado, Arizona, Nevada. We have some fires. So I've as a CERT and Aries volunteer, I would be deployed to do things like traffic control or food distribution or delivering food up to people that were snowbound during, I called it Snowmageddon. Some of the trailers that people were almost overloaded with snow. They were trapped in their homes. They couldn't travel. So we through a church up there at Magalia, it was kind of a distribution center where we would go out and we'd bring, there were some volunteer snowplow people as well as the government officials clearing out roads and driveways as well. So, and then we also have floods. We have fires, floods, riots, earthquakes. The earthquakes and riots were not so much in Northern California, but we certainly had floods, and so we'd be putting up sandbags and stuff. So the emergency departments were pretty diverse and well staffed. There's the sheriff, the fire department, the state of emergency service. They tend to cooperate pretty well because they have so many things that they have to handle. So and that the hams. So some of the, like ARES is a ham radio group, Amateur Radio Emergency Service. That's an ARRL program, and there's something similar called RACES. But there's also a thing called CERT, and we had occasionally would use ham radio, but mostly that was GMRS, as Art was talking about earlier. And so it's easier. You pay your money and you get your license on GMRS, and you can run up to 50 watts, and you can use little handheld radios like this. This is actually a ham radio, and it would be illegal to use GMRS on it because we never want to violate the law. But I think I have some GMRS channels programmed in there just to listen. Not that I would ever talk, because that would be, the FCC would be very sad if that happened. So here's let's see if I can get this to show up on camera. It's always a challenge. Okay, so these are amateur radio bands, and they're disappearing. They're disappearing. You got to vote now.
Yeah, right. You're losing your privileges.
Yeah, they're vanishing as we speak. So I think it's 1,500 watts is the legal maximum that I've heard. Now I don't know if that's peak envelope power or if 1,000 is the RM. What would a key down on Morse code be as opposed to the peak of a sideband voice signal? So that there might be. Yeah, there you go. Okay, we can actually see that. But you're not doing the silly background. I've got my Vegas background here just to show where I am.
So there's some of the different privileges you get.
Yeah, that goes from DC to daylight, as they say. From below the AM broadcast band up to VHF, UHF, satellite, microwave type frequencies, and everything in between. And you can see what privileges what class of license has. So oddly enough, you are now my better as far as as an amateur extra. You beat my advanced class, which is grandfathered in. I plan to upgrade one of these days. And I was talking to someone at a ham swap meet who's also an advanced, and he said he's not. You got to hold on to that because it's like I think I'm going to upgrade anyway. It just this legacy. I'm going to keep my same call sign and everything like that. But the difference, advanced and extra, lets you have privileges when you go to other countries, like in South America and Europe, under different treaties.
Wow.
And so the only thing I think the advanced doesn't have that an extra has is some sort of VEC. But he was administering tests too as an advanced. So I don't know. Maybe I'm going to upgrade. I'm going to try to. It's just
VEC as a volunteer exam coordinator.
Volunteer examiner. Well, a volunteer examiner, just someone who's going to administer it. Someone administering the test that people take to become a ham.
Oh, but you have to be an extra to do it. You probably have to be an extra
Yeah.
to do a BCV.
Yeah, I think so. I think that legally is the requirement. So when I got licensed in 78, I had to go to the FCC office in San Francisco, and they played a cassette tape. So and we had a Morse code test, which you don't have anymore. A lot of people use Morse code, but you don't need to know Morse code to use it. Hence my
Yeah,
if you
they
could
got
put
rid
up
of
that.
the code requirement. 94?
Yeah.
I think they got rid of it. Yeah.
Something like that, yeah. So I have one of my chat links is for the Enmorser, unlisted Enmorser project. If you could put that up, just to show the link. So that's unlisted. So if you're a lucky viewer of this video, you get to see a presentation on it. It shows it. It's on GitHub as well. The code. And some other sloppy code for I'm trying to do some logging with it and everything. That the Enmorser is kind of working. The other things are almost sort of working. Python code that I would run on a Raspberry Pi. Although I might go back to Arduino. I don't know. Just speaking of transhumanist type stuff, artificial intelligence. So chat. The people who do ChatGPT just put out a new model that does some long chain reasoning. There's like an 01 preview. So I gave just a brief description of the Enmorser, and I said, how would you do this in Arduino? And could you tell me how to wire it up? And since it's not really at this moment, not doing graphics or images, but it gave me a detailed verbal, you connect this D1 to this, it went through and I said, okay, now instead of a microphone, have it create a QRP radio for 40 meters transceiver. And then it described how to build that and link it in. So I don't know if it would work as described, but it certainly would be a giant step toward getting something like that working together. So that I found that interesting, just playing around with the AI.
And QRP is the Q code for
reduced
power.
Reduced power. Yeah. So you might say QRO is full power, and I don't know what it means. What it would be to increase power, but anyway, yeah. QRP is. Some people say life is too short for QRP. Because it's harder to make contacts on low, if you're running 5 watts than it is on 1,000 watts. But it's also easier to carry a 5-watt battery than a 1,000-watt generator on a backpack. So,
and it is a point of good operating practice that you should use no more than the needed power to make the QSO or the contact. But like you said, life's too short.
Yeah. Well, like FT8 and stuff, it kind of makes sense. I'll run 510 watts on FT8 because sometimes the USB cable that connects to my radio gets RF interferes with it, and it knocks it off, breaks the connection. But I can sometimes run about 45 watts or so, and that it's even with 5 watts. I could reach all over the country on 40 meters. That's the thing that's the band that I'm having trouble with now. It used to be 80 meters in a different location. And for some reason at this location, the way that I'm surrounded by computers and everything, 40 meters is the troubled band when I'm doing FT8. But the other bands I can run as much, fuller, like a 45 watt power as opposed to 5 watts.
And we should mention that FT8 is one of the digital modes that lets you kind of basically communicate keyboard to keyboard. Right. Yeah, there's a bunch of them actually.
One of the links in the chat is about ECI, Michael Cobb. I mentioned, there you go. So that starts off with a map of my FT8 contacts at that time. And I was explaining to him, that's a hobby that I do. So you can kind of see the contacts I was making, all, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, one in South America, a couple out near Europe. And I've worked into Europe.
That's all with 100 watts, I'm guessing, right?
This is under, yeah, is like 45 watts or something. So, and then of course all over the U.S. and Canada, and may have had Mexico in there. It's weird, the coverage or lack thereof sometimes with these modes. And that map has all sorts of different colors on it based, because I usually start like at the 160 band, 80, 40, 20, 15, 10, all the way up to 6 meters sometimes. Not getting much on 160 or 6, as yet. But the other bands, you'll get contacts, and those show up as different colors on that map at the beginning. So, the other video that has the Enmorser has a lot of stuff about how many ham operators are there, how many international operators are there, or at least who the majority are. So I think Thailand is an outlier. That it may actually beat Japan as far as number of ham operators per population. I could be wrong about that, but Japan has a lot, more than the U.S. per capita, I think, or maybe not. Because isn't it about the equal population, or as they've aged out, maybe they don't have as many. I don't know.
I don't know, but
China's minuscule. They haven't outlawed it, but they're not. Given the size of their country, they don't population. They don't have that many operators, and then you have Canada, France, and Germany. Some other places. But I've worked into Europe, Britain, on other occasions. So the propagation varies on shortwave. So that's one reason that you might want to investigate satellites. Of course, satellites can be taken down, and as I was saying, the phone system can go off-grid, offline, and so you might want to have an off-grid alternative, and for power. So, like early on, this is a Honda solar generator by Jackery. Oh, dusty, but it provides. And it uses the old battery chemistry, but I still use it. I also have a bio EB3A, whatever that is, a BioNO. No, that I have a BioNO battery, but it's whatever the other one. I can't think of the name. Starts with a B, but so then I know there's like EcoFlow and some other companies that do these things. If you want to buy a pre-built one, and then there's a fellow named Will Prowse, who has a channel on YouTube, and he tears those things apart. He'll build custom systems out of just the batteries, and he'll make the inverters and all that other stuff. It's an interesting. So he's kind of a review channel / DIY type of fellow, and then there's a Professor Hobotech is another guy, and he mostly does reviews of the battery systems without trying to tear them apart or anything. So he's more of a good reviewer. So if you want to find a go-to person on those.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering. I used to work at Batteries Plus Bulbs, which is kind of a chain, a franchise chain, but I happened to have a customer come in and say, "Oh, we have this backup system for our hospital clinic, and we don't want it anymore. Can someone come and take it away?" And it's pretty expensive to repopulate the batteries in this, because it uses these 12 volt. It actually uses 20 to get to 240 volts DC, and they have to have the big honking connectors on the top, and it's the lead acid battery. It's about that size. Right. But I'm wondering, could I create like a this may be overly esoteric, technical, but can you make any battery appear like a different? Like, could you put lithium ion cells in something, and with the right charge controller, it would look like a sealed lead acid, or it would act like a sealed lead acid battery? Because
they have plug-in replacements for car batteries. I think that are lithium chemistry, maybe lithium iron phosphate, or what. Hopefully, it'd be something safer than regular old lithium ion.
Yeah, because batteries have
yeah.
different profiles of how they like to be kept up and
Right.
maintained and drained and recharged.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I think they have some that are just like, as far as a driver, they don't, no big deal, just drop it in. Maybe the low temperature might be a problem. Some of them have heater elements to, if it gets too cold, stuff like that. I think here in Nevada we have Battleborn has some safety features of, regarding temperature. They're a little pricey as far as, but people put them in RVs and stuff, so they're already spending a lot of money anyway. So why not?
Yeah, batteries. They require care and feeding. They don't like to get too cold or too hot. They don't like to be run all the way down to zero. That can kill a battery. All kinds of In fact, it'd probably be useful to have an app that keeps track of all your batteries, and because most batteries will lose about 1% of their charge just sitting there. They don't stay charged up, as they are stored.
Sure.
But,
well, like even this thing has a state of charge indicator. Wow. And you can see how much power is going in and out. And this is just an old black and white thing from like the newer ones. I wish I could think of the name. Anyway, the EB3A from a company called, starts with a B, and it's not BioEnno. That's the only thing in my old brain that I can think of. It's a different company. But they have a nice colorful display, and they have bigger models, and you can run a cabin off of it, the bigger models. I think you even have some that will run like 30 amp type, RV type hookup things.
Now, you mentioned GMRS, which is a way to get on the air without having to pass any tests.
Right.
You just pay a fee, and then you can get one of these cheap little radios. Like, this is a GMRS radio you can get for like $30 on Amazon. And now you saved some lives, I think, with GMRS during the campfire, didn't you?
We've done some work. I don't know if I was out, it wasn't like the search and rescue jumping out of the helicopter and jumping in. So, although there are teams that do that, and I think they use GMRS, some of them, or they might use some of the public safety frequencies. They get like a Mars letter from the local agencies, and they're able to do that. And we kind of got away with that sometimes too. Our emergency service department kind of like encouraged us to use, because the Baofengs and those are, to put it, are slutty as far as what frequencies they can transmit on. So they, sometimes you can get away with that if they wanted. If I figure if the guy told me to, then I can do it. And so GMRS, you can look that up. It's the FCC has a user hostile interface to go through. You have to get you have to get a FRN. I always thought Federal Reserve Note was what FRN stands for.
That's what we used to call it.
You have to get a number. You have to get a number, and then you have to, you eventually get through, get it.
Yeah.
There's probably, if you did Google GMRS license and buyer beware and beware of scams, you could find what, a better way, easier way to do it. So I don't know exactly what that would be these days. I got mine, Jack. So
so there's a question. We got a question in the chat. Is there some sort of national hierarchy? Well, go ahead and ask. You could probably phrase your question.
Yeah. Okay. So just reading it. Oh, yeah. So Alan, if you want to just chat up, if you want to talk.
Oh, sure. Thanks.
Okay.
And I'm just curious, like, how is the ham community not organized, but regulated and governed? I mean, your license is clearly like an international license, but how is all that structured? Are there local?
Well, I think there's ITU is an International Telecommunications Union that is kind of the treat or agreement that a lot of countries use to coordinate their ham, their radio frequency in general, and ham radio in particular. And in the U.S., we have the FCC, the Fascist Censorship Committee. I mean, Federal Communications Commission. I'm sorry, I'm just old, I forget. But
used to say FUCC too, I think. But sorry, didn't
right, yeah, it's the FCC, federal, our beloved government, a wise government, has created 3 classes of license. So right now, at the moment, there are 3 classes of ham licensees: the technician, general, and extra. Now, back in my day, we had
there was a novice. Yeah.
Yeah, we had novice and advanced, and I have the advanced, so I'm grandfathered in. Being an old fellow. So yeah, so advanced, in between general and extra or advanced. So I get like more frequencies in general, not as much as extra. Those elite, those
So,
1%ers like Dan Tweet. Yeah.
So is it a matter of what is the difference in the license allow? Does it mean that you can communicate on more frequencies or with more power range?
Well, a technician, the lowest class license, a technician, you get full privileges and full power in VHF and above. So 50 megahertz, 6 meters on up, you're top dog. I think you can do anything. Below that is where they start slicing and dicing, and so the technician on the lower, you have 80, 40, 20, no, 80, 40, 15, and 10 meters. You have some Morse code privileges on up to 200 watts on those bands. So that's kind of where I'm kind of aiming the Enmorser project, is to try to cater to the technicians, because the technician class licensees number about half of all the ham licensees. So to ignore them is to cut out half of the people for emergency communications. Now, fortunately, they can use VHF and repeaters and all that good stuff anyway. But so if you want to have them participate, like when the grid goes down and the cell phones aren't working, sometimes repeaters can burn up or get struck by lightning, the antenna. I've had all these things happen. Yeah, so the repeaters that we use for
just to clarify, a repeater is an antenna on a mountaintop or some high area, and if you can hit the input frequency of the repeater, it will rebroadcast on the output frequency.
WA6ZF1. So that's a repeater beeping. I'm keying up. It heard me, and then it came back with that beep.
Yeah, that shows
people all over Vegas can hear what I was saying if they were tuned in there. That's the club repeater. And there are other, like GMRS. We have a lot of GMRS repeaters in town.
Oh, yeah.
And one of them is really active. It's kind of a conservative talk. People get on there, and it's kind of fun to listen to. And up around Chico, where I was in Chico, about 100 miles north of Sacramento in California, the sheriff comm reserve put up a repeater that covered the entire county. So actually, they put up 2 repeaters. So that's very useful. They had a weekly net. You'd think you were listening to a ham thing, except they were doing GMRS call signs. So they had a pretty disciplined, organized group on GMRS, and a lot of the ridge communities would get their own repeater for GMRS, like Cohasset, which is like, burning to a crisp when it's not overloaded with snow. They were, so a lot of these places have these community repeaters that they have local people get on, and it doesn't, the radios aren't expensive. You can run them off internal batteries, or just like the battery I showed you. So
what about open versus closed? Some repeaters are open and some are closed.
Some of the community ones, some of those are closed, but they kind of let me, some of the Aries group, we kind of cited them to begin with, found a good location for them, so we kind of get allowed in to use them, just because we're kind of like advisors for them.
I recorded a little bit of a net last night. We have something called the board net, and it's off the Bozo Peak repeater, and you can hear.
Is that what I called the toilet channel, or is that a different thing? Is that
Oh
Bozo?
no, that was Mount Disappointment or the Renegade.
Yeah,
well,
right, 145 or whatever.
435. Yeah, the garbage channel. There was a repeater, and the FCC said, well, they're just talking. They're violating all kinds of rules. They're swearing. They're insulting each other, but. Let's let them stay there, because otherwise, if we shut them down, they're going to go around and talk on all the other.
Right.
But here's what the board net sounded like a little bit last night. You hear people checking in, and it's just kind of something that got started for after COVID. For people. This is called Conejo After Dark, and anyway. Kilo 6, Victor Delta Romeo. There's me checking in.
Yeah.
And then the net control.
VDR for joining us tonight. Any more check-ins coming out?
So yeah, everyone will check in, and then when everyone's checked in, then they'll go down the list, and people will give a comment or say, "Well, I'm just in and out." Just
well, it's a good way to test your equipment. Make sure you're getting out. Your antenna hasn't been pinned or knocked down or something.
Yeah, if your homeowner's insurance will let you, agency will let you put it up.
Right.
Which,
well, there's still
support that bill. Support
designs. Like we were talking about, like they could track you down easily. Maybe in the U.S. they have the Kraken. They have this thing called the Kraken that they can use the Doppler locate things, and so. But I think in foreign countries, a lot of insurgents have luck with beam antennas. Because you can do a pretty good tight beam on UHF, and you could make connections that are kind of like outside of their listening ken, and so it's interesting. And that spread spectrum, that's a thing I've always been interested in. You can actually legally use spread spectrum on ham radio. There's certain sequences that are permitted, evidently, but I've never investigated that. I'm looking for the. So, for instance, you transmit noise and then here's another one. It's transmitted reference. So you have like thermal noise in a resistor, and you transmit it on one frequency, and then you have that same noise mixed with a message, which also sounds like noise, in another frequency, and the receiver would take the difference between the two and come up with a message. So, although they both sound like noise. And that's kind of the theory of how spread spectrum works, because you get all this digital frequency hopping or chip bits, direct sequence chip bits they call them. Yeah, it sounds like noise, and then you can digitally clean it up. So.
And that frequency hopping was invented by none other than.
Hedy Lamarr.
Hedy Lamarr.
Well, I don't know that she was the actual first inventor, but she came up with the design in the 30s, and let me just see here. Okay,
inspired by a player piano. She was apparently.
Yeah, there was. Right. So there was a guy who did a composition called the Ballet Mécanique, and I talked to his son on one of the news groups back in the in the 90s. I don't know if it must have been. It was the one devoted to privacy and stuff like that. There was a transhumanist type of thing, extropian, and then there was another one that was more privacy and that kind of thing. Cypherpunks.
That's it.
But he might have been on the cypherpunk news group. This is back in the early 90s, so before there was PGP and stuff like that. So I remember. Well, yeah, PGP came out, and I remember talking to the guy Zimmerman about. Hey, this is great. I just looked at the manual. It was like a 21-page manual for this encryption software, and I haven't even run it yet, and I love it, because of all this stuff. And then, of course, it developed after that. Okay, so I'm going to find. Okay, so.
And just to clarify, you're not allowed to use secret codes on amateur radio. But,
except to maintain control of a access point for like a satellite or a repeater.
Oh, okay. But yeah, they
so
don't want like spies, giving secret
right.
messages.
Anyway, so that book cover I just showed you is a thing called Anarchia, and it's an alternate history of the Spanish Civil War.
Oh, put it up again there.
Oh, well, I just
Oh, well,
tried again. Okay.
yeah, you are a noted creative guy.
Yeah, so this is, I co-authored this with Brad Lineweaver, a best-selling author who did a World War II alternate history called Moon of Ice. And so I said, hey, we ought to do one about the Spanish Civil War, because being an anarchist, I thought, that'd be kind of fun. To have the anarchists win, that kind of thing. So I wanted to have Werner von Braun, Konrad Susa, and Hedy Lamarr work together to fight the Nazis and the Stalinists in
how much
Spain.
was how much to option the script?
Yeah, right. Well, actually, Neil Schulman did do that, but it's there you. Oh man, thank you. Oh, awesome. I like that on there. So yeah. So I'm on there as an author, also so it has my name on there as well. But so weapons of super science. So we have like drones of the time. We call it the horns of the bull. And fun. We steal the gold, going to Stalin, and give it to the anarchists. That kind of thing. So. Although I know Von Braun does some sort of rocket launch against the bad guys.
And I think, did you also have a story where people in jail were using like the plumbing system of the jail to do Morse code?
Right, exactly. I think that was published. No, the blue light was published in Prometheus newsletter. I don't think that the other one you're talking about was ever got published anywhere.
Mm.
So, oh well.
Well, we should mention the Prometheus Award is given out every year by the Libertarian Futurist Society, which is, I think, over 3 or 4 decades old by now. And great group. They give out that every year at their convention. Yeah.
Anarchia was endorsed by Harry Turtledove and Ray Bradbury. I met Ray at a play. He was doing Fahrenheit 451 play in Pasadena. And I also saw the Irish play that he does it at a different location. And so then Brad Lineweaver knew him since Brad was in college. Brad is the late co-author of Anarchia. And he was a best-selling novelist.
He was famous for... He was a Young Americans for Freedom kind of guy, right?
Oh, right, yeah. He's a Yaffer that kind of became more minarchist libertarian later on. I think he was kind of minarchist back in the day. He may have actually used that term. So he was friends with William F. Buckley, and William F. Buckley, I think, endorsed something he did, and then he was Buckley's agent on the Blackford Oaks novels. So it was kind of his James Bond type character. And I think Brad reviewed Getting It Right, which is a novel about, like, you had the John Birch Society people, the libertarians, and the mainstream Republican types, and there was people bouncing around. That was kind of a fun read.
Yeah, and he had an argument where he said, "I want a yacht. If ever these poor people are guaranteed, I want to be guaranteed a yaght." Yeah,
Ronald Reagan was a fan of Brad Lineweaver. So yeah, Ronald Reagan had I think he had been governor, and he hadn't run for president yet. He had a radio show, and he was praising Brad Lineweaver. I think before Brad wrote any books. This is back, another college antic. And he was saying how, so Brad had written this thing about socialism, this about how he was having an argument. I think the audio is online somewhere. It's in the Reagan collection of speeches and stuff. There's an audio book of some of those, and it's in there. But so Brad wants 2 yachts, and it's a long story. I don't remember it offhand, but yeah, you got it right.
Mr. Gorbachev, give these people yachts. No, no.
Yeah, I want 2 yachts. There's something else I want. 2 yachts.
But what about communications for people that want to be under the radar? Can you do all this stuff over CB? I mean, is CB dead? Couldn't you apply all of these kind of
in the rich
digital
communities around in Northern California? Like there was a town, they would listen to CB channel 10, which is kind of like not used by the truckers and everything. So it's kind of like the local, if there's something fishy going on, they would, basically like they'd go to a restaurant there and they'd have CB channel 10 up there. And then later on, they started putting in these GMRS repeaters because, it extends the range and it's FM quality and it's, easier to deal with. So CB is being supplanted by the GMRS type things. And CB is not really stealthy at all.
Yeah.
I have an FT991 Alpha Yaesu. Now, you can put it in service mode. So instead of just the ham frequencies, in service mode, it will transmit on CB and GMRS and stuff. So I'm told. I mean, I would never. You think? Are you suspecting me of any breaking the FCC regulation? No, of course not. But that I'm told, and you don't need to mess with the hardware or do anything crazy. You just. I think I have a sheet of paper about how to get into service mode, but that's just because you might want to do some repairs. I don't know.
Now, the other way to fly as under the radar is to be under a certain wattage threshold, like micropower radio. I think anything under, 100 milliwatts, which is like 1/10 of a watt. You can just go to town, just so you're not like making your neighbor, not be able to hear his FM show. But you see these
there's
little
an antenna length also. Yeah, there's an antenna length restriction as well. So it's effective radiated power is probably, ERP would be what they're aiming at. There's low power modes like Whisper, WSPR, but FT8 is pretty good with that. I mean, the fact that in this, I've got a vertical thing on a tripod stuck in a tree. It's like in between all these branches in a tree, and it reaches out, to Asiatic Russia and Europe and Africa, South America. So, with FT8, so Whisper I think is at least as good, if not better. So, and you can do it, so there's different modes out there.
And there's things like LoRaWAN, which is long range wide area network.
Long range is still like to the horizon. It's not like it's not going to skip land, as the CBers used to call it. You'd be sitting here in California or there in California and listening to Kentucky. That was skip land. So if CB sometimes during the 10 meter during the sunspot cycle would get longer range communications barreling in. So yes, and we call that skip land.
But like, how does helium work, or these things where you can actually relay data, digital data, and get paid for doing that? Is that being regulated by the FCC, or is that just so low wattage?
Yeah, it's licensed by rule, like with FRS or some of these other things, or like Wi-Fi and stuff. You don't need a license, but there's rules that you have to follow. So it's not they're not like Dan Tweet is here on his FR family radio service. They don't care about that, but if you're causing interference or causing trouble, then they would get involved. So.
And that's kind of the nice thing about the hobby is it's kind of self-policing. We can do direction finding to figure out if people are jamming or
Kraken. There's a device called the Kraken that helps people find ne'er-do-wells.
Yeah, because I think there's only like about 2 FCC inspectors for the whole state in general.
And you can use a beam antenna. You can make, like they show the China during the Cultural Revolution, they had these little kids with the beam antennas running around trying to find stations.
That's called a transmitter hunt or a T hunt. That's
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, that's still a time-honored thing that we do at some picnics and things. We'll do that just to kind of get kids involved.
kind of
We'll
like
have a hidden transmitter. I've set up a Raspberry Pi because the old ones you could have it transmit, and I would set it up to transmit on 2 meters. Of course, it was horribly square wavy and everything, but it was low power, and you could hear it throughout the park. So they would go and try to direction find and I'd have it on a continuous loop of playing the ham radio news line. And so that there'd be something on there and they could go and try to find out where it was. It was like in a bucket near something. Had a battery with a bucket.
And there's all kinds of creative antennas too. I know we just recently had something called the Micro Expo at the California University Channel Islands, and there was a guy showing you how to make measuring tape antennas. You have like an old metal measuring tape. You can actually unroll to where it stiffens and then becomes an element of like a Yagi antenna.
Right.
And
that's a pretty common thing I've seen. Yagi. Yeah. Although Yagi got credit where the other guy, there was another fellow involved. So
that's right. Everyone
that's kind of like the. Not Morse, more like the Tesla Marconi.
Marconi got credit.
Right.
The other thing that's kind of interesting is called APRS, which is an acronym for Automatic Position Reporting System, which you can enable on your radio. I have a friend who's a pilot and a ham, and he loves to play with location, and that kind of brings up other related hobbies.
I have. Give me 1 minute. I'll be right back.
So in the meantime, while Kent is retrieving the item he wants to show us, Mike Lazine has a question. What does HAM stand for anyway? And my understanding is it's not actually an acronym. It's part of the history of amateur radio. But Daniel, if you'd like to explain how that term originated.
Yeah, there's several stories about that. One story is it goes back to the days of telegraphy, and some people were kind of ham-fisted and you could recognize their telegraph style. Another thing is they were literally hamming it up. People would get on the air and they would become all theatrical. There's a couple other stories that are pretty clever, but I don't remember right now. But yeah, it's not an acronym, and if you don't like saying ham, you don't want to offend vegans, you could say radio sport. That's what they call it in a lot of other countries.
The ham, it doesn't really have no one agrees on the origin actually. So it's
but
it's fine. I use ham radio is fine. Okay, so I found it was behind me all the time here. It wasn't in my own. So this is a GMRS radio, and it has a display. It has a GPS receiver, so it'll determine your location, and it also will send data. So if you're deployed at like a county fair, that's being used as an evacuation point for a fire or something like that, you could send a text message because there might be all sorts of noise and sirens and all sorts of activity that you couldn't really talk easily on it. But you could send a text message with this to like the front gate saying, hey, send someone with water to point 3 or what, to a location, so you could map out stuff. So we did that. And that's not even APRS. That's GMRS. And
speaking of location, some hams use this system, some don't, but it's called What 3 Words, and basically every 10-foot square on Earth has 3 unique dictionary words that will send you to that square. So I think this was invented because someone was at a festival and they wanted to get pizza delivered, and there was like no address, when you're in the middle of a field or something like that. But I was thinking, geocaching is kind of a cool hobby that seems similar to amateur radio.
A lot of hams are involved in that in Pahrump. There's like 3 different ham clubs out there, and at least back in the day. So, and then a lot of them were into the treasure hunt or whatever, geocaching.
What would you think of a?
Now the three words. I've never heard of that. I'll have to look that up. But the common thing in the ham thing is distinct from like the latitude longitude, which can be kind of like can be confusing with the degrees and all that stuff. Is to have this Maidenhead grid square.
Right.
So like I'm, I think DM23 KE or something like that gets you pretty within a few blocks of where I'm at, and different parts of the world have different. I might have got that wrong. It's coded into my thing that I send out all the time. So maybe it's DM26, something like that. Whatever. I'm in like North Las Vegas at the moment.
I'm DM04NE. And that's called the Maidenhead system because it was a conference in Maidenhead, England, where they came up with this. We need a simpler way than giving out like long strings of latitude.
Right.
So they've actually every extra set of characters is like a finer grid.
So they're like the first two was good for like an antenna direction. So if you're trying to get a better signal, you don't have to go and to 20-digit number. You just do a couple letters.
Yeah, but that what three words? I think it's .com, but it's what and number 3 and then words. Might be .org, but it's just about a 5.5 megabyte database. But it's not open source. If you want to use it in some app, you have to get a license agreement with them. But
humbug. Yeah, ham radio is an open source hobby.
I've got an idea for an open source one. You can tell me what you think of it real quick. There's like 10,000 airports around the world, and they all have these IATU
LAX.
codes. LAX, etc. So why not take 3 airports nearest you, and then if you had the distance, it would give you a pretty good, where the three circles intersect, and then in the process, you're memorizing the airports, which. In H.G. Wells' world, it was the airmen that saved civilization. So wings over the world,
Right. So and they'd probably be evacuation points anyway, or people scrambling to get out there. And airlifts, supplies would be airlifted in, that kind of thing.
I almost finished my CERT training. You were talking about the community emergency response teams, but the final lesson was a mass casualty simulation at Camarillo Airport, and COVID was just breaking out. I'm like, I don't think I want to go to a mass casualty simulation, with this virulent pandemic.
We were delivering food. We were wearing our masks and gloves, and we had boxes of food. People were lining up because the store's shelves were empty for a while. So even people that had some money were having trouble finding some supplies. And so that was one of the things we did early on.
The great toilet paper panic of 2020.
Yeah, some of the cheaper stores were the ones you could find it. So you go to Trader Joe's or whatever, or big Albertsons, and they'd be out. But you go to like 99-cent store, and they'd have lots of it. So that's a tip.
So what is the strategic commodity for radio amateurs? Batteries, bullets, beans, all three.
Copper, what is it? Copper jacketed lead. Bimetallism. Anyway,
there was a guy on that renegade repeater who said, "Never sell your radios and never sell your guns." But well, I don't know. Most hams have more radios than they actually.
This is unloaded, so don't worry. It's a 9mm. But I used to work at Front Sight, which is a gun training school.
Heard of them? Yeah.
So we would take videos of people coming in taking training. So we'd film them shooting at the targets, and we'd have a target's eye view, how well they're doing, and like over the shoulder type thing. So we'd do videos, student of the week videos. And I think Front Sight had COVID did not treat them well. And the county and the state were not sympathetic to having them have classrooms and people getting together, to take training. So they met their demise, and then they were succeeded by an organization called Prairie Fire. I don't know if they're still operating that, so I should check in on that. And I was in Chico anyway. Go ahead.
Yeah. Mike Lazine wonders whether the ham or amateur radio operators share the same space or perhaps the same spectrum as walkie-talkies, or whether there's a difference in terms of the technology that is used or the spectrum that is used there.
I know some of the old walkie-talkies were part of the CB band, but go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Channel 14. Yeah, so the old when I was a kid, when I was your age, Channel 14 walkie-talkies were what they had, and then they went to another thing that was not FRS, and then now I think FRS is kind of what people get. You know, the blister packs of the cheap radios you get at the sporting goods store, and those are no license, low power. They work on the same frequencies as GMRS, so you can interoperate between them. I think the FRS ones use narrow FM, and the GMRS can use wide band FM if you have a choice. It gives you a little more, sounds like more volume or whatever. And you can use repeaters on GMRS that you can't use on FRS. So you can hear an output of a repeater on FRS. So like you said, that if they share channels, you can hear what's happening. You might not be able to participate fully on the FRS radios. But we would use FRS radios on deployments if we were at like a county fair or something, and we were kind of doing a patrol, helping them out or something.
Yeah, I think FRS is family radio service, and that came in, I think, in the late 80s or mid 80s, somewhere around there.
There were some confusing bits of the spectrum, and then they normalized it out, so now it's pretty common.
Yes, thank you for that response. And a related question from Alan Crowley is, what is the minimum investment to get started in a hobby like ham radio or amateur radio? So for example, there could be costs for getting a study guide, paying a test fee, getting a low-cost radio and antenna power source. What would be the essentials, essentially, for somebody who wants to get involved, try this out, achieve a qualification?
I would say under $100, possibly, because the test is going to cost like $35, I think, around that. And then you can go on Amazon and see all kinds of Chinese radios that are well under, $30. And
Quansheng or Baofeng and those different types.
And then to pass, if you just want to use one of the free online study guides or study applications, the FCC publishes the pool that your test will be drawn from. So it's something like 500 questions and answers. And then out of that, I think, what's the technician test, like 35 or 70? But, a lot of them are pretty common sense on the entry level test. And you only need to get, I think, about 78%.
74,
74,
yeah, something like that, whatever. Yeah, that's 78 sounds good.
So, it's not an expensive hobby like it used to be. I mean, I guess it never really was that expensive, but it's the kind of thing that I think once you, fall into, you'll get sucked deeper and deeper in, quite possibly. So I don't know. That's probably a good thing. Yeah, say that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So thank you. Yes, that sounds like a fairly inexpensive cost to just begin. I'm curious about the call signs as well. Could you describe their purpose and also how they're assigned? What do the alphanumeric combinations stand for?
Could you put up that one of my early chats was a map of
I've got
country.
the country
there
map.
We go. There we go.
It is. Yeah, so I'm in 6
okay,
land.
So California's in 6, I'm in 7. There's several states that have a 7 call sign. Like Maine has 1, New York has 2, Pennsylvania, so you can see it's kind of a population thing that they're grouped by. And so like WA6ZFY, I got it, like I said, I was in San Francisco when I got that license, and I didn't have to change it when I moved. And Dan's in California, so whatever. Some people want to change their call sign when they move, but I moved too much. to do that. So
And you
and
can
WA6.
you can try to get what's called a vanity call sign.
Yeah.
I think since I'm an extra class, I could conceivably look for a shorter call sign, and some people look for calls that are easy to send over Morse code.
Yeah.
Like little short, like the 2-character Morse letters. So I think the shortest is like a 2x2 call, where you got 2 in the prefix and 2 in the suffix characters. Although some of the special event stations are like 3 characters. Yeah.
Right.
Sometimes they'll have
Like
special,
a field day, we'll have it. Yeah.
Yeah, like recently, some people made an expedition to Jarvis Island, and they wanted to activate Jarvis Island. And they stayed there for like a week, receiving contacts, and people could put that on their their log sheet. And there's a whole interesting, outdoorsy thing. There's parks on the air where people go into national parks and they operate from there. And then they can say they've activated that park. Summits on the air. People will climb to the top of a summit and work POTA, SOTA. So with this,
Islands on the air is another one.
What's it called?
Islands on the air.
Oh yeah, IOTA.
Yeah.
But with this project called Sequatoria, which is kind of a seasteading open source project, I'm hoping that might start out as an amateur radio activation thing, because we could do a lot of interesting experiments and see productivity and regeneration with uncrewed automatons, robots. Actually in Newsline, there's a weekly show called Amateur Radio Newsline, and one of their news items was there's a new what's called a shield for the Raspberry Pi, which allows very reduced price underwater communication. So if you want to do like an underwater modem, check out the latest Amateur Radio Newsline. That's one of the items on there. And there's a great science community too, and called hamsci.org. In fact, I can, and they typically
sometimes they'll do astronomy, ham radio astronomy. So there's
a lot of solar weather, a lot of atmospheric propagation tests. But I think they should get together with like one of the oldest community science activities is birding. People that do bird counts and identify birds. And I think, this mass extinction that we're in, we should actually be doing, what 3 words, grid squares, what species are in, each grid square, and how's their health and habitat.
I think a related community is the makers.
Yes.
Like maker spaces and stuff. So a lot of them were doing something about keeping track of radiation and pollution by geography, having sensors for that purpose.
Yeah, there's a program called iNaturalist, I think, too, where you can take pictures with your cell phone and identify species and things. But yeah, I love the fact that the ham and the maker movement are converging. There's so many things people need to build for their ham shacks.
If you go to Hackaday, you can see several ham radio projects on there. That's like maybe like 1 out of 10 or so, or maybe even more. But
and you can do limited commercial transactions if it's related to ham radio. That's so. I mean, that could be a pretty broad, right. Sweep of, hey, this is for my ham shack. So
like with GMRS, you can do more stuff. Like I can go to a supermarket and talk about prices on GMRS. Maybe,
okay.
And I think on ham, it used to be that you could order a pizza or something. If maybe not, but
what about Bitcoin? Have people done Bitcoin transactions over?
Well, that's not legally.
Unless it was buying something for your ham shack, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a gray area.
So well, perhaps you could spend it. Oh, sorry.
Perhaps you could order a pizza with ham over ham
Yeah.
radio. And
There you
Alan
go.
writes,
That's right.
our most extraordinary inventions in history have been driven or fueled by pizza. That's an interesting observation. Of course, these would have to be the more recent inventions, like in the past century and a half
Right.
or so. Francois Joanneau writes that he was somewhat dubious at first, but ham radio is definitely the thing to connect floating islands together. So that is echoing your comment, Daniel. And Alan wonders, can police bands be monitored with ham radios? He says he only wants to listen in, but this could actually be a good way for citizens to exercise some surveillance, some monitoring of
Yeah.
police activities and communications to make sure that the police don't get out of hand. They don't plan to use excessive force, for instance.
Well, police and fire and sheriff in like Northern California, where we were, you could listen to them with simple FM receivers, like, you could program your Baofeng to listen in. Now a lot of them have gone to digital encrypted modes that even if you had the digital receiver, you'd have to have the encryption to listen. So some of them have become opaque. Like I think around here, there's some agencies that do that. So it's kind of a hit or miss. There's some online scanning apps.
I forget the name. What's the good one? You can use the internet to listen to practically any.
I have it installed, or I had it installed. I think I may have taken it out. It was Scanner Radio was one. Scanner Radio. And
interesting. And Art Ramon writes in the comments that he has a cheap analog radio scanner that picks up state police, but city police is digital and he would need a pricier scanner. So it also depends on what communications channels the police would use. Now, Art Ramon, do you have a question or a comment or any observations based on some of your experience in amateur radio?
No, just my experience. At first, I bought a cheap ham radio, and I kind of programmed it from the website Radio Reference with all the channels I could listen into, and I kind of used it like a scanner. So you could just have it scan through all the channels, and I was picking up all the GMRS and the ham stations and the FRS, and there's a few other things I could pick up. But that actually got me more interested in radio scanning. So then I bought a cheap radio scanner, and I was able to listen to a lot more with a cheap radio scanner and listen to everything I could with that radio scanner, because that could listen to the ham and the GMRS, and then the other, like the state police and public works and a few other things. The city, the Tucson city bus, I could listen to them and pretty much listen to them for a good while until I got bored of that. Then I had to upgrade to the digital stuff, and that has that digital P25 standard that is open in my area here in the Tucson area. So I could listen to the sheriff, I could listen to Tucson PD, I could listen to the police force on the reservations and airport communications. And that's just a lot more interesting to be able to listen in on everything going on, because if something happens, that's kind of what I want to do first, is listen to what's going on versus trying to reach out to somebody. Is what's going on first, before you start transmitting. You have to be aliens hunting people down. I don't know. So, the first thing you want to do is listen. So I've already upgraded to the priciest scanner you can pretty much get, which is this guy right here by Uniden, and it's like $600 something to get one of these. But this allows me to listen to everything in my area here.
Wow. And sometimes they will do what's called trunking. They'll send on one channel and receive on another, so you're only going to hear half the conversation unless you have. I'm assuming your high tech scanner can do.
Oh yeah, it does all that simulcast and trunking and everything else. So I'm able to listen to everything in my area, and it has pretty good range with the standard antenna. So and I have the GMRS radio if I ever want to contact anyone, but that's a much less priority for me now. It's to me, it's listening, gathering information, just like I gather information from TikTok. There's a lot of stuff on TikTok that you don't see anywhere else. So it's just information gathering, network. So yeah, I like my radio scanner.
Yeah, that's a legitimate hobby, scanning, scanner fan. And the site I was trying to think of is called broadcastify.com.
Oh, okay.
They have like
another thing, WebSDR.org,
yeah.
I think it is. And there's also Open Web RX or something like that. But anyway, that's one I use for local Vegas stuff. It covers all sorts of things. But WebSDR is more geared toward ham things, maybe some broadcasts, but mostly, WebSDR. So if you want to listen to conversations in Russia or South America, and as well as all over the U.S., you can, is that working? So.
Yeah, and SDR is short for software-defined radio, and basically you can get a little unit that plugs into your USB, and your computer, and then you got various kinds of antenna. A ground plane is always a good idea when you have a antenna, and basically the software is telling what to do with the data coming in through the antenna.
Well, that's if you want to become like a node or something, but like WebSDR, all you need is a web browser, and you're suddenly listening to all sorts of different things. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It just has a waterfall display. So you see a bunch of signals on a band, and you kind of click on one that you want to monitor. And I think sometimes, like with Morse code, some of these things will actually decode. I think it was PAN, the thing that used to do PSK31. I forget the name of it. That software I used to use all the time. I miss PSK31. That's FT8 stuff. Anyway, so that you could see it was kind of decoding all the things as they were coming across. And then, that looks interesting. You could click on that, then you'd be able to be in a conversation with them. So
and here's an example of a mid-range radio that does HF. This is a Xiegu 6100, which now it's been superseded, but it's cool because it's got a color display which can do what's called a waterfall,
right,
where and it's kind of showing you in real time, what the activity on the spectrum is. I'm still waiting to put up a appropriate HF antenna.
SDR has a waterfall display as well, so you can see the signals coming in. You can select like 40 meters or 20 or whatever.
And this is pretty much a computer wrapped around a radio. It's basically got like a pretty, maybe Raspberry Pi or greater specification computer in there. And I think that's around $500 or something. But again, I wish we had more locally made, low cost equipment. But
well, I think it won't be coming from China too much longer. I think 5-10 years.
Yeah.
They're having a crisis for demographics and just supplies. As world trade unwinds, they're going to have a lot of trouble.
Yes, that would be a troubling situation altogether if the trade networks that had allowed us a much greater abundance and variety of goods contract. This happened, of course, during the decline of the Roman Empire, and it ushered in the Dark Ages. And this happened to a great extent in the late 1920s, early 1930s. It helped to usher in the Great Depression. So those are not good times, even though self-sufficiency is an understandable aspiration. You don't want to be dependent on supply chains that are overly fragile. On the other hand, you want to have the ability to access those supply chains if you want a particular product, and ideally you would have multiple options as well for where to get it. So if those trade networks contract, we may be in a situation where we need the ham radio operators more often because the rest of our society will experience greater disruptions as well as a result of, say, lack of essential goods to maintain our infrastructure. But I wanted to connect this to transhumanism to a greater extent. I know you've made some comments in this direction, but where do you think ham radio, especially as it's likely to evolve over time, fits into the overall transhumanist vision of forwarding the progress of science and technology? Obviously, some intricate technologies are involved in this area, but also this is a pursuit that can help in situations where other technologies are not available. So is this primarily a way for preparing for some of those, let's say, less palatable futures where transhumanists would still want to have a technological edge and an ability to overcome the crisis at hand? Or is this a mode of operation that could be integrated into some of the more techno-optimistic scenarios that we could encounter? What are your thoughts on this?
I have some ideas. So if, some people are looking forward to decentralized energy, for example, solar, wind, et cetera, and maybe local nukes, if they could be done safe, like the Copenhagen atomics with their design. I think it's a molten salt. They got a special container. I mean, they're looking forward to cheap nukes, and of course, if fusion never goes anywhere in a commercial realm, that'd be nice. But so there's as far as world trade, at least information will be able to go across borders without being pirates and everything. You might have local tyrants that block things, but there's no technical reason that information can't be delivered from point to point. So that might be, you might have someone with certain conditions they might benefit from designs from another continent that could help them out. So information might be crucial. And of course, when the RepRap came out, some of the boosters of that were calling it China on a desktop. So the 3D printer, you'd be able to print all sorts of doodads and knickknacks that would formerly be shipped from China. And so that, I don't know if it's stalled. I think the 3D printers have become kind of a consumer item now. It's easier, friendlier to use. I don't know that they're taking the world by storm. I think there's things you can do. You can make like a, telegraph key with a 3D printer design. Not that that's advancing much forward, but I think you can exchange information. So eventually, on the decentralized realm, if you have local power, you might not be able to power your life because, like, if you have low solar irradiance or no wind, like a lot of the country, especially if you have a densely populated city, solar and wind isn't going to cut it locally there. But you might be able to have power, where there is solar radiance and you have wind, you could transmit it there. Like in the US, it'd probably be easier to do than some other locations.
I can weigh in on a transhuman aspect.
But even if you have a crappy solar, and you could still run a solar oven, even in like a wintry location, like New England, and you could have enough power to power your ham radio or communication devices, although you might not be able to heat your home and do all that stuff. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I think that, transhumanism runs on the free flow of information and an informed populace. And unfortunately, those two don't always, synergize or potentiate each other. But I think we've all heard the quote, information wants to be free. And I looked that up, and that's actually something that Stuart Brand, who, to bring this back to the whole Earth, he was the guy that was asking why are there no pictures of the whole Earth from space? Because he knew that would cause this huge shift in consciousness. But let me just, he said this in 1984 at the first hackers conference, and it was printed in the Whole Earth Review in 85. But the quote goes like this, quote, information wants to be free. Information also wants to be expensive. Information wants to be free because it has become so cheap to distribute, copy, and recombine, too cheap to meter. It wants to be expensive because it can be immeasurably valuable to the recipient. That tension will not go away. It leads to endless wrenching debate about price, copyright, intellectual property, the moral rightness of casual distribution, because each new round of devices makes the tension worse, not better. So, a little
Interesting.
bit of,
So it's not the kind of optimistic
right.
statement that most people attribute to Stuart Brand. It's actually a lot more nuanced. It's about this ongoing rivalry and even arms race between those who want to set information free, like our friend Francois Joanneau here, who says set information free, and those who would want to make it artificially scarce and expensive. And sometimes I've had to deal with people like that and figure out ways to keep information free in those contexts. But yes, thank you for sharing the full quote. And by the way, I do have a short video, very short clip from NASA of the whole Earth. Here it is.
Oh, there you go.
Yes. So we do, of course, have excellent space imagery now, especially nearer to the Earth, but other planets have been imaged with similar detail, and the James Webb Space Telescope has released some extraordinary images that are challenging some prevailing understandings of cosmology, just as I thought they would. So there is just so much progress possible and so much insight possible from that kind of imagery. And to think that we just had the static Earthrise photo not that long ago, 5.5 decades ago, essentially. So that is something to ponder. But Daniel, please continue with your thoughts on the relevance of amateur radio to transhumanism.
Well, talking about kind of the social media aspect, it seems to me, there was never much of a flat Earth movement until we had like internet-based social media, and now it's just gone crazy. I mean, I don't know if these guys are serious, but it seems like well, what did Mark Twain say? It's easier to fool someone than to convince him he's been fooled. And I think, the runaway pandemic of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation is something that we really need to take seriously. But one thing that there's all kinds of ways that amateur radio can refute these, flat Earth believers. One of them is a mode called EME, which is Earth, Moon, Earth, or moon bounce. And some people actually use the moon as a reflector, and they can talk, anywhere the moon can see in the sky, they can bounce a signal off. It takes a lot of power, and the return signal is vanishingly weak. But it's, you can see there's a speed of light delay of 2.5 seconds, when you bounce a signal off the
That's
moon.
where JT65 came up, which became FT8 later. So these weak signal modes were developed because of moon bounce.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting. Yeah. It's like they say, CW or Morse code will get through where the phone modes won't.
Oh, as meteor scatter is another one.
Oh, yeah. That's another great.
So you can reflect, you have like a 500 watt signal, and probably want to do a digital thing. A short packet would get through. So every like 90 seconds or so, there's some sort of meteor that is reflecting. I guess there's meteor or meteorites, but things that kind of burn up in the atmosphere, they'll have a brief reflection where you can send a packet to about a third of the world's surface, because it just kind of extends. It's like a low orbiting satellite almost.
Yeah, that ionizes the air, and that's provides that skip possibility where you can the various layers of the atmosphere, the ionosphere. They change.
And just plain fear, the stratosphere, the ionosphere, and just plain fear. That was an old joke.
And then there's
Ah,
something called the troposphere, which is the lowest part of the atmosphere. And sometimes you get the marine layer, which we're very familiar with on the West Coast. Overnight, morning, low clouds. That's actually lets you do something called tropospheric ducting, because the ocean and that 1,000 foot up or so cloud layer acts like a wave guide. So sometimes you can hit like Hawaii with very
yeah.
low wattage. They call it the Pineapple
Yeah.
Express. That's a
Right.
phenomenon called tropospheric ducting. So
I've done that. It happened to me at Culver City. I was able to hit Hawaii on 2 meters.
Fascinating. So we have about 4 minutes left in our salon, and I wanted to, first of all, thank Alan Crowley for his generous support today, and I wanted to make sure we get to his final question, which is, how do transhumanists and the U.S. Transhumanist Party tap into amateur radio's connectivity and incorporate this technology into a broader movement? So in the next 4 minutes, what are each of your thoughts on this?
I've thought about
I
this
would.
a lot. Go ahead,
Oh,
though.
go ahead. All right. Okay. Well, I was going to suggest some of the license-free, governed by rule type of modes that like the LoRaWAN and things like that, where you don't need a call sign, could create networks that like digital networks. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and I see the power of amateur radio to be kind of a organizing nexus for things like the maker movement and community science movement, getting people talking across borders and boundaries more. Because there was a piece of advice I got very early on. I think I was a teenager, and someone said the fastest way to increase your intelligence is to communicate and meet and communicate with as many new people as possible. And you could do that in lots of contexts, but I think the amateur radio infrastructure is optimized for that. So that's a transhumanist thing, increasing your intelligence by communicating with other intelligences. And it's kind of funny too that the plots of alien science fiction movies have often involved, we got to defeat the aliens because they didn't know Morse code or something like that. We did know Morse. So it was like, hey, hams to the day, saving the earth. But yeah, I mean, it might seem counterintuitive to like you're using this anachronistic, why are you using like something that's not state of the art, but I think you need to challenge, your conception of technology and the world, and continuously kind of refresh that image of your personal overview effect and your civilization overview effect and your evolution overview effect. And governments aren't going to do it. I don't think. That's why I keep running for office. I'll keep running until they get better at it. But yeah, that's just some initial thoughts about Spaceship Earth and transhumanism and amateur radio.
Yes, thank you very much, Daniel. And your thoughts about interacting with many new and different people certainly resonate with me. This is one of the purposes of our virtual Enlightenment salons, where we invite guests from a variety of fields of endeavor and communities, and we have the kinds of conversations that will not be had in any other medium, because we bring all of these people together and we drop some of the boundaries that commonly exist across disciplines, and we want to bring in new technological ideas or older technological ideas that are enduring but can be integrated with new technologies. So I really appreciate the thorough overview that both you, Dan, and Kent have provided about amateur radio, some of its history, some of the key people involved in it, a great in-depth discussion of the technology and the applications, the practical uses of amateur radio, and indeed, it is worth reiterating that it has saved lives in emergencies, and long may it continue to do so. So I really appreciate this quite unique salon. I think our viewers will benefit from revisiting many of the links that have been shared and the videos that have been provided. One final video that Dan wanted to share is this documentary from 2022 called Ham, so please check that out. And we will continue to bring this kind of unique, engaging content to you. Until next time, I hope that we can all live long and prosper.